Hey, Travis with TCustomz Productionz, TCustomz.com. Today I have a very simple and easy to the point tutorial for you on how to add a splash reverb to your snare. In particular, in those cases where you want to get that extra impact and in such a way that you don't dilute your original snare. I'm going to be demonstrating this on a hip-hop instrumental inside of Ableton Live. Now this can be applied to any DAW or software that you're using. All you're going to need is your favorite reverb or reverb plugin of choice and a single band EQ or a high pass, low pass filter. So before I get into this, just to give you a demonstration of what I'm talking about, I'm going to play back this clip, and at the end of the clip is when you'll hear the reverb snare, and we're going to show you how to create that. So first, I just want to solo out and just focus on the two drum tracks, the two snare tracks that I have here. So I first just played the snare without the reverb and then the snare with the reverb. As you can obviously see, I have two separate tracks to achieve this effect. This first track is my main snare that's playing throughout. You can see the entire track here, and then there's only this one place where I have a little MIDI note for the snare reverb, and I'm using this particular effect in the arrangement aspect. This actually comes down the first part of the second verse, just where some of the instrumentation drops out to kind of give an extra impact, build a little extra excitement for the track. But instead of just adding reverb or automating some reverb on this track, what I've opted to do is actually duplicate the track and create a separate processed reverb snare. So what's the purpose of using this technique with multiple tracks to achieve this? Well, number one, I don't want to really affect my original snare because it may change the impact if I start just trying to add processing some extra reverb that my other snares don't have directly to this original track. So to make sure that I am not adding any unwanted changes or affecting the original snare track in any way, how I started this process was by duplicating this original snare track. And I knew this was the snare hit right here that I wanted to have additional reverb on. So all I did was I went through this track and deleted all of my additional MIDI information that I didn't need. And now, as you can see, we're getting a little bit closer to what this snare reverb track is. Now, if I focus back on the process snare reverb, you're going to see that I have an auto filter and I have, my reverb. In this case, I'm using the stock Ableton plugins. Again, you can feel free to use whatever type of filter or reverb plugins that you have available. So the first thing that I did was I drug over a reverb and I made sure that the wetness, the dry wetness, was all the way on 100%. So if we come back up here to this newly duplicated snare that I just created, I'm going to rename this to reverb demo just so you can distinguish that from the other two tracks. So this is the one that we're actually working on right now. I want to find a reverb, drag this over here. Your default settings and your reverb may be different. In this Ableton reverb, the dry wetness is set at 55% by default, and I'll just play you back what this is going to sound like with the default settings. I've still got some impact from the original snare, and you can play around with this. What I'm going to do for this tutorial is I'm going to take this up to 100%. This is going to make sure that it's not going to have as much of the impact from the snare. I'll play this back now. And the only other setting I'm going to adjust on this is the decay time. And so just to give you an example, by default it was set on 1.2 seconds. I'm just going to arbitrarily take it up to, let's say, 4.5 seconds, just to give you an example of what that sounds like. So I'm just expanding that tail. Now for me personally, because I use a lot of snares that have a lot of at least mid-frequency and sometimes low frequency information depending on the sounds that I'm using. As you can see here, I'm actually layering about 7 or 6 different sounds. And so when I add reverb to the snare, I still have a lot of that mid and low information that's coming through that I don't necessarily want when I blend in my reverb with my original snare. So if I play back the way this would sound with the original snare, And especially when you start to go in and finalize the mix, I know I'm already going to have certain instruments, especially bass and other maybe low frequency synths, that are going to be occupying some of that space. It's going to come down to your preference on what you want it to sound like. But this is why I've gone ahead and added an auto filter. As I come back down to the process reverb, I've got the reverb, and then I also have put a filter before, and you'll see I have a really high threshold on this high pass filter, 2.47 kilohertz. That was just based on my ear and what sound I liked at the time. So if I come back up here to the auto filter, I drag this over to our working track. I don't think in this case it would make too much of a difference which effect comes first here, but I want to turn this into a high pass filter. I'm going to play it back once original, then I'm going to loop it up. And so by just focusing on that high-end information, I'm getting more kind of like a splash effect. Now you could take this a step further and you could use even different, say, snare sounds or different sounds that you're processing for your reverb to maybe give a different tone or texture. But again, that would be up to you. And so now that I've got these essentially layered, I've got my original snare information layered with this new process reverb snare. And if I play that back, this is giving me more of the desired sound that I want. And then obviously, since you have a separate track, you now have individual volume or velocity control over this. Now I can essentially just take down the reverb if I want it less reverby or increase it. Furthermore, I can still continue to adjust the decay if I don't want the tail to extend as long or I want it to go a little bit longer. I'm going to play back this little loop starting with just the original snare, and then I'm slowly going to introduce the filter and bring up the level on this just like I did before. And so that's pretty much it. You can experiment with this. I use this technique in a lot of my tracks when I'm looking for this particular type of sound. It's really simple to do, and you just want to use your ear to get the level right on it and to get the settings adjusted just how you want. If you have any other input or questions on this, feel free to drop those in the comments below. You can reach out to me on social media. Again, I will link the full step-by-step videos on how this beat was created in the description below. Also, feel free to check out the channel for more beat making tips and videos, music production tips, tutorials. I'll also include a link for a lot of the drum samples and sound packs that were used in this particular track. If you like the video, please make sure to like, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Peace.